You know, he's probably one of the most artistically minded of the royal family in generations. But now he's king, he probably doesn't have a lot of time for painting. And so, to the actual coronation. We can't show you the entire event, of course, because it was quite long. But we'd like to show you some images from the very key parts of the ceremony. So we can have our first picture up.
We didn't really get invited, of course, but this is the official design released by Buckingham Palace that has the coat of arms of the King and Queen with the letter C for Charles and Camilla. The border is a sprawling British wildflower meadow featuring symbols such as rosemary sprigs for remembrance. Flowers appear in groups of 3, signifying that the king is the 3rd monarch of his name. The design centers on the Green Man, an ancient figure in British folklore who symbolizes spring and rebirth. Next slide, please.
So the event started at 10:20 a.m. in British summer time, which was 2:20 here in the morning in California, with the King and Queen leaving Buckingham Palace for Westminster Abbey in the Diamond Jubilee State coach, and we'll talk more about that later. This is drawn by 6 Windsor grey horses and accompanied by the sovereign's escort of the Household Cavalry. The procession, seen here in the Mall on their way to Admiralty Arch, featured just under 200 members of the UK Armed Forces, flanked on either side by over 1,000 personnel from the Army, the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force, lining the route. Next slide, please.
On the arrival at the Abbey, the king wears the robe of state, made of crimson velvet and previously worn by King George VI at his coronation in 1937. The king's pages of honor include his grandson, Prince George of Wales, who did really well for a 9-year-old, seen to the top left of the king, who is flanked by the bishops of Durham on the left in this picture, and Bath and Wells on the right. Next slide, please.
So the first part of the coronation ceremony is the presentation of the king to the people. Starting with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the king faces east and says, "I here present unto you King Charles, your undoubted king. Wherefore all you who are come this day to do your homage and service, are you willing to do the same?" And then this statement is repeated by other people to the south, the west, and the north. And everybody assembled responds, "God save King Charles," after each of these. Next slide, please.
The coronation oath is a legal obligation dating from 1688. The Archbishop of Canterbury asked the king, "Will you solemnly promise to swear to govern the peoples of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, your other realms, and the territories to any of them belonging or pertaining, according to their respective laws and customs?" The king replies, "I solemnly promise so to do." A specially commissioned King James Bible is presented to the king by the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. Next slide, please.
So this is the anointing, which is the only part of the ceremony that the public do not see. An anointing screen was made by the Royal School of Needlework from cloth woven and finished in UK mills from Australian and New Zealand wool. Designed by New Zealand-raised iconographer Aidan Hart, the central design is a tree which represents the 56 member countries of the Commonwealth. The 3 sides of the anointing screen are borne by a trooper and guardsman from each of the Life Guards, Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, Scots Guards, Irish Guards, and the Welsh Guards. The anointing oil used olives harvested from 2 groves on the Mount of Olives, and perfumed with sesame, rose, jasmine, cinnamon, neroli, benzoin, amber, and orange blossom. Next slide, please.
The Archbishop of Canterbury performs the crowning with St. Edward's crown. The Abbey bells ring for 2 minutes, and a 62-round salute is fired at the Tower of London, and a 6-gun salvo at Horse Guards Parade. 21 rounds are at a further 11 locations around the UK, including Edinburgh, Cardiff, and Belfast, on deployed Royal Navy ships, and in Gibraltar and Bermuda. The king sits in the coronation chair, more on that later, on the Cosmati pavement, an elaborate Italian mosaic laid out in 1268. Next slide, please.
The Archbishop of Canterbury swears fealty to the king on behalf of the Church of England, followed by his son, William, Prince of Wales. "I, William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty to you and faith and truth I will bear unto you as your liege man of life and limb. And actually, this is the first time a Prince of Wales has paid homage since the future King Edward VIII did so at the coronation of his father, King George V, in 1911. Next slide, please.
Camilla, the Queen Consort, is crowned by the Archbishop of Canterbury using Queen Mary's crown. This crown was commissioned and worn by Queen Mary at her coronation alongside George V in 1911. It is the first time a consort's crown has been reused since the 18th century. Next slide, please.
And here we can see the King wearing the imperial state crown and the Queen leaving the Abbey, preceded by the jewelled sword of offering carried by the Lord President of the Privy Council and also leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt MP, and with the groom of the robes, Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Thompson, between them. Next slide, please.
The King and Queen take a golden state coach, more on that later, drawn by 8 Windsor Greys back to Buckingham Palace. The procession featured nearly 4,000 personnel, making it the largest military ceremonial in operation since the funeral of Sir Winston Churchill over 60 years ago. It takes about 30 minutes to travel 1.42 miles into the palace and about 22 minutes to pass any single point on the route. Next slide, please.
So here we see the King and Queen on the balcony at Buckingham Palace. This is very traditional. They're flanked by their pages and members of the working royal family, and they come on the balcony to great applause from all the people who were there.
Yeah. And after arriving back at the palace, the King and Queen appeared on the west terrace of Buckingham Palace, where the UK military personnel who were in the procession gave a military salute, and the massed bands of the armed forces played the national anthem before giving 3 cheers.
That was quite exceptional, it really was.
It was, yeah.
Okay, so this is the official picture released by the palace, and this is showing the working royal family. So from left to right, for those of you following along at home, the Duke of Kent, the Duchess of Gloucester, the Duke of Gloucester, Vice Admiral Sir Tim Lawrence, who is the husband of Princess Royal, who is next to him, followed by the King, the Queen, Prince of Wales, Princess of Wales, the Duchess of Edinburgh, Princess Alexandra, the Honourable Lady Ogilvy, and the Duke of Edinburgh. So that's our wrap-up of the coronation, but we'd like to show you some fun facts about the coronation. Let's have the next slide.
Westminster Abbey has been the setting for every coronation since King William I, aka William the Conqueror, on Christmas Day in 1066. Before the Abbey was built, coronations were carried out wherever was convenient, taking place in Bath, Oxford, and Canterbury. King Charles is the 40th sovereign to be crowned at Westminster Abbey. Next slide, please.
So here we can see the ampulla and the spoon, and the anointing oil is actually carried in the ampulla, made from gold and cast in the form of an eagle with outspread wings. The oil is actually poured from a hole in the beak. The ampulla was supplied for the coronation of King Charles II in 1661 and is based on an earlier, smaller vessel, which in turn was based on a 14th century legend in which the Virgin Mary appeared to St. Thomas a Becket, presented him with a golden eagle and a vial of oil for anointing future kings of England. And in front of that, you can see the silver gilt coronation spoon, and it's the oldest object still in use at coronations, having been first recorded in 1349 among St. Edward's regalia in Westminster Abbey. And it's the only piece of the royal goldsmith's work to survive from the 12th century, having possibly been supplied to King Henry II or King Richard I. It was used to anoint King James in 1603, King James I, and at every subsequent coronation. Now, a little short story here. In 1649, after the English Civil War, and Oliver Cromwell got rid of all of the crown jewels, the spoon was sold to the yeoman of King Charles I's wardrobe. And if you remember your English Civil War history, King Charles I lost his head, courtesy of Oliver Cromwell. But this yeoman of the king's wardrobe actually returned the spoon back to when the royalty was restored, when the monarchy was restored, and it was used for King Charles II's coronation in 1661. And they added some small seed pearls to decorate the handle. So, next slide, please.
A representation of the sovereign's power and symbolizing the Christian world, the sovereign's orb was made from gold in the 17th century. The cross on the top is bent off center, having been dropped by a would-be thief in 1671. During the English Civil War, Irish-born Colonel Thomas Blood swapped sides to fight with Oliver Cromwell. But when Charles II returned to throne, Blood became one of the most wanted men in England and tried to steal the crown jewels from the Tower of London. During the botched heist, the orb was dropped and damaged, leaving the cross still crooked. Next slide, please.
So this is the Diamond Jubilee State Coach, which was used for the procession to the Abbey. This was built in Australia for Queen Elizabeth's Diamond Jubilee in 2012 and has interior wooden panels made from 100 historic artifacts, including oak timbers from King Henry VIII's flagship, the Mary Rose. The crown on top of the roof is carved from timber from Admiral Lord Nelson's flagship HMS Victory. The handrails came from the Royal Yacht Britannia. Now this coach weighs just over 3 tons. Now let's compare this coach with the coach that was used for the procession back to Buckingham Palace. Next slide. Here we can see the Gold State Coach. So the Gold State Coach was commissioned in 1760 for the coronation of King George III in 1761, but it wasn't ready in time. But it has been used at the coronation of every British monarch since William IV. Now this coach weighs nearly 4.5 tons. It's 29 feet long and 12 feet high. And it actually requires 8 of those large Windsor grey horses to pull it, but only at a walk. It's the best they can do. It's gilded and features painted panels by Giovanni Battista Cipriani and a rich gilded sculpture. So next slide, please.
The coronation chair is an ancient wooden chair on which British monarchs sit when they're invested in regalia and crowned at their coronations. It was commissioned in 1296 by King Edward I to contain the coronation stone of Scotland, known as the Stone of Destiny, which had been captured from the Scots. In the 18th century, tourists could actually sit on the chair for a small payment to one of the vergers in Westminster Abbey. Early tourists and choir boys of the Abbey carved their initials and other graffiti into the chair, and the corner posts have been acutely damaged by souvenir hunters. Next slide.
Can you imagine? That's just amazing to me. Okay, but most of you know by now I'm an avid stamp collector, and I wanted to show you here. These are the first new definitive stamps issued by the Royal Mail on the 4th of April for King Charles III. The King's effigy doesn't have a crown on it, but it's an adapted version of the portrait that was created for the new coinage. And the use of a crown coin image is a continuation of a long tradition dating back to the creation of the penny black, the world's first postage stamp, with Queen Victoria in 1840.
Awesome. Well, we hope you enjoyed our presentation on the coronation of King Charles III. But before we wrap up, you wanted to let people know some new books we're publishing, right, Dick?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Sophie. So, as you know, we published some books last year, coincident with the APMP conference in Dallas. And this year we're doing the same for the APMP conference in Orlando. And so we have 3 new books that are coming out. This is the first one is the SMA Way, which I was very proud to actually put together. It's a style guide and reference for proposal writers in a convenient spiral-bound format. And it shows you how to structure your response, how to create graphics that help tell your story, and how to write easy to evaluate text. And it has a really nice reference section in the back. The second book is The Essential Principles of Baselining Solutions for Proposals, written by our COO, Jacques Keats. This book defines the 9 principles essential to successful baseline development, a critical step in delivering a winning proposal. And our final new book is Improving Sales and Revenue Forecasting on Certain Markets, a New Expected Value Approach. This was put together by our CEO, Ajay Patel. It explains why forecasting sales and revenues has been a persistent problem for companies, but it gives guidance and templates needed to better manage the sales pipeline and more accurately forecast revenues. Next slide. So I want to make sure you all understand, as SMA associates, you can access the electronic flip book versions of these books on our corporate SharePoint site in the library. So I'll just leave the slide up for a second or two. This actually shows you the quickest way to get to these books. If you go to private.smawins.com, pretty much that's all you need to remember. You can get to everything from there. Once you're there, you're going to click on number 2 there, the SMA Knowledge Center. That'll open up SharePoint. You log in with your email address and your password. And then when you're in there, click on the library on the top navigation. And when the library loads, at the bottom of the page, you'll see a icon that says books, and that'll take you into the library. And so you can access the flipbook versions at any time via those links. We will have physical copies. They'll be available on Amazon probably in June after the conference.